Well, thank you. I think, Doug, I'm glad I'm coming after you, and I'm glad I'm going to have the last word. I was asked to look at this about how have parents been able to be involved. And I have to begin with saying that I am the parent of two African American sons who navigated this pre Katrina system as well as the post Katrina system, and getting both of my sons educated. My second son graduated in 2014, my first son graduated in 2004. Doug said that, the rest of the country is looking at us. Right now we have people in Chicago on a hunger strike for education. They want to make sure that what's going on in cities like New Orleans, where we take away schools to do reform, or we do reform without really doing it with the people, people are putting their lives on the line, and I'm joining them today in a 2-day hunger strike in solidarity with them because you don't do reform to people like this and then just get them to weigh in on it or buy into it. But that's exactly what's going on with Diet High School in Chicago, and even the idea that the mayor thought he could just put a art school in place of the school that had been closed, and that's not what the community was saying they wanted. Those things were done to us in New Orleans without our voices. In New Orleans, our voices have been reduced to just being a consumer for schools. Warren said earlier that it's important for us to tell our stories, and enough stories of what has happened to parents simply have not come out. I did, in your packet, you'll see a list of some websites where we are trying to do just that, tell the stories through the New Orleans Education Equity Roundtable. We've been producing some short videos, and we'll produce some more. And you'll see sub videos where you do get to see us telling our stories. I also included a couple of links to one is of a parent telling her story of this idea of school choice. You got to think about who's not in the data, who's not in these stories that are coming out in major news publications. But for many years, I've been documenting parent voices as I work to help parents. I work with parents of children with disabilities. And in the early days of these reforms, and it still continues, a lot of our children have been pushed aside and pushed out or not served well as schools try to build up their illusion of success. I'm going to call it an illusion of success. And so there was a lawsuit. The Southern Poverty Law Center in 2010 filed a lawsuit based on some of the experiences of these children with special needs, and that lawsuit was not settled until 2015. And I wonder if that settlement would have even happened had there not been the emergence of a whistleblower to talk about, to verify some of the things we have been saying all these years were going on in the school, that there were massive violations of children's rights. But just as that was about to come out, suddenly the state negotiates a settlement for a lawsuit when it was way back in 2008 that as a parent organization, we went to the state and said, look, we have these problems with these charter schools not serving children with disabilities. Our voices were just pushed aside. So now parents basically have been reduced to being a consumer. So we get to, some parents get to see this book called The New Orleans Parents Guide to Public Schools, where you can look through this book and theoretically, like looking through a catalog, choose a school. And as Ramon was speaking about the no excuses models, I said, oh, I wonder if, I had never looked at that. I wonder if it tells you about the behavior approaches. And certainly for one of the no excuses schools, it says, behavior approach, no nonsense approach to discipline that emphasizes student responsibility and accountability with a focus on relationship building. And I immediately think about the parent that I worked with whose child was at one of these, that was a KIPP school, where her child was ostracized, basically shunned. He was pushed aside. She eventually left New Orleans. And when this parent left New Orleans, she moved to the North Shore of Louisiana, across the lake. And I called her one day to see how her son was doing. And she said that he's happy. He's happy he gets to go to PE now. He no longer feels like a failure. But at this school, because he was never earning the paycheck, he felt like a failure. So a parent looking in this guide to choose a school would certainly not expect to get the behavior approach that made her child feel ostracized, especially when they talk about building relationships. And then I see another school that is highly touted in New Orleans that many parents might want to put their children in this school. They have risen from to be a B school. This school didn't take over a group of children. They started one grade level at a time, and they're now a C school, but they did get as high as a B school. And when it comes to their behavior approach, it says a system of scaled reminders and rewards in every classroom, targeted behavior plans, parent conferences, personal behavior trackers, detention, suspensions, and re-entry or return to community plan, logical consequences, restorative justice, and problem-solving approach. Nowhere does it say that the children have to walk between two lines on the floor as they change classes. Nowhere does it say that to get off the bus you have to say these certain chants and shake the administrator's hands. And children were sent home for not doing this. And when those children protested, suddenly the school says, okay, we're going to change. We're not going to do so many suspensions. And now they're touting their lower suspension rate. But when parents choose a school, they don't get a real view of what the realities are going to be. Nowhere in here for these schools did it say that we will call you constantly for behavior infractions, for uniform violations. But that is exactly what our parents are having to go through. So as they go through evaluating whether or not a school is going to be a good fit for them, how will they know? It's choice, real choice, if it's not really informed choice. I remember my niece was considering moving to New Orleans. I said, well, let me go check out a few schools. I wanted to see the discipline handbook for a school. And they told me, well, first you have to apply and get accepted before you could see this. Well, how would I know if I want to apply to this school? So it's very difficult. Doug mentioned something about we can't have this system of choice and neighborhood schools at the same time. Well, actually we did. I was a little poor black girl going to school in New Orleans, in a very poor neighborhood in New Orleans, where I went to my neighborhood elementary school, my neighborhood middle school. But when it came time for high school, this is back in 1978, I decided I didn't want to go to my neighborhood high school. Not because it was a bad school, I just wanted a different experience. And so I applied to 2 other schools, and I was accepted at both. And I actually chose to go to a school that Barbara was the principal at, but not at the same time, Warren Easton High School. So I understand from way back in 1978, there was a system of choice. I lived in a very poor section of New Orleans East, and on our one block, I had friends who went to 4 different public high schools. Only one of them was a, quote, magnet type that had an entrance requirement that would mean you had to perform at a certain level. Some of my friends went to schools where they simply had to apply for a permit. But when people think about what was in place before, they act as if choice was invented post Hurricane Katrina. I know that it wasn't because I chose. I actually had a neighborhood school, and I chose to go outside my neighborhood, as did many of my friends, and some people even chose to go to private school. When my own 2 sons came, I worked in the French Quarter with the first son. There was a school down the street. I knew nothing about it, but I knew it was convenient to my job. I chose to put him in that school. I just walked in and said, hey, can my son come to school here? The principal said, give her an application. They didn't know me. When it came time for my second son to go to school in 2000, I didn't want him to go to our neighborhood school because we live far out New Orleans East. And so I filled out applications, and my son was accepted at 3 different schools. Now, this time, one of those schools was a magnet school, and he was tested in kindergarten. And as sick as it sounds, they rank order kindergarten test scores, and the top 50% the top scores got access to 50% of the seats in kindergarten. That's sick. But that's Lusher Charter School. And in 2013, when Lusher Charter School decided that my son's grade point average was too low and sent me a letter saying I had to find another school for him, I couldn't choose my neighborhood school. So when people ask me if things are better, I say, better for whom? I know what choice looks like because I've lived it. In 1997, when I needed to put my first son in the neighborhood middle school, I could actually choose that. I couldn't choose the school in 2013 that's 2 blocks from my home. I couldn't choose it. So no one can convince me that today we have choice and we didn't have choice prior to Hurricane Katrina. Certainly no one who didn't navigate this system, no one who just parachuted into my city after one of the worst disasters in this country can convince me that they know what's best for me and what choice is when I've lived it over a period of I guess almost 40 years now. And so it's very insulting when people who don't have my lived experiences as a public school parent comes in and try to tell my whole city how to reform its schools. So for other experiences parents are having, even after they choose a school in this new system called an illusion of choice, their choices can be taken away. I told you about the settlement of this lawsuit with the Southern Poverty Law Center. We had a group of parents, and you'll see, if you go to nolaedequity.org, you'll see the video from Lanyap Academies. It's called The Special Dispatch. The parents were very upset that their choice is being taken away. They chose Lanyap Academies. And I met some of those parents, and the year before, they were standing in these long lines in July heat in New Orleans waiting to apply to get their children in school. And 3 of the parents got their children that summer into Lanyap Academies, the summer of 2014. But by March of 2015, they're being told their school is being closed because there were these massive special education violations. Our Lanyap Academies was not an F school. Parents loved the school, and I went over there. The children indeed looked happy. And certainly I would never sanction special education violations. But I also know that there are many special education violations going on at many schools in the city, and those schools were never closed. I have an Office for Civil Rights complaint with one of the parents I work with at one of these charter schools, and it's still under investigation, but the school did do this thing that they were not supposed to do, and the state knows about it. The state didn't close that school. But they closed this school, and these parents were not happy. So their choice was taken away, and they were not given the opportunity to just go back to their neighborhood school. They had to jump back into the One app, which is basically a lottery via computer that uses some type of algorithm to figure out which school they're going to give you. It's really ironic because prior to Katrina, when we had real choice, I could put down as many schools as I wanted to and fill out as many applications as I wanted to try to get schools. But the One app limits you to 8 options, and you might get one of those 8. Whereas the old system, you could apply wherever you wanted to, and if you came up with 3 or 4 choice options, you actually chose which one you wanted. So there's just a real skewed idea of what choice is. Parents have also been convinced that their voice is that, okay, we'll let you choose your charter operator. Some parents get to choose that. But what about the choice of not having a charter school at all? You see, when other people control what education reform is in your city, they also control what your choices are. And then they want to convince you that you have parent choice. That's problematic. And certainly our friends in Chicago are dealing with that right now with Dyett High School. The mayor has decided that they can have the choice of an art school or no school at all. That's not a choice. It's very arrogant, it's paternalistic, and it's racist. We hear a lot about involving the community. We're going to do community engagement. Well, the Recovery School District received over $6 million from the Walton Family Foundation several years ago to do some community engagement around those high schools that Barbara talked about. You know, the children who were in high school post-Katrina were the most neglected children in all of New Orleans because the Recovery School District did nothing to help them. The Recovery School District had willing community members. I was one of them. And there were several committees of willing community members who put together plans. We had plans on paper. The money that was received by the Recovery School District, most of it was spent by the superintendent on high-priced consultants to come in and help us put these plans on paper. None of those plans, except for the International High School, ever materialized. And we find out that International High School, that was not from people who were working, who had kids in our public school system. This was somebody else's plan to have an international high school. That's not even a Recovery School District high school. But the John McDonough Steering Committee, those plans never materialized, and John McDonough High School is now going to become one of those diverse by designs elementary schools. We moved out all of the African-American struggling high school students, closed the school on them, and they had to go find other schools to attend. And all of a sudden, we're going to start from scratch with this nice diverse by design elementary school. Douglas High School, they shut that school down with the remaining 11th and 12th graders in it, and those students had to find another school to go to. The school in my neighborhood, I actually took time away from rebuilding my home to serve on the Recovery School District's, on a committee to get Greater or Lake Area High School rebuilt from scratch. There was no school there. It was a middle school prior to Katrina, and I knew to rebuild my community, we needed a high school. And so I worked with my neighbors, and we put together a plan for a technology-based high school in our neighborhood, which was in Gentilly. There was no high school in Gentilly because somebody decided not to reopen Kennedy High School. There was no community engagement process to make that decision, but we knew we had a couple of elementary schools in Gentilly, but we didn't have a high school, so we worked on 3 years to get this school created. This was 3 years prior to my son being able to go to high school. I had a vision of my son being able to finally go to school in his neighborhood because we were going to create a diverse school in a diverse neighborhood that would not be selective admissions. And I feel duped by Paul Vallis, the former superintendent of the Recovery School District, because as long as we were working with the idea that maybe we wanted to charter it, but maybe not, he was working with us. But then as soon as it was clear we did not want to charter our school that we created, we didn't want to charter it, he worked behind our backs to make it a charter anyway. And that school's a charter in my neighborhood, 2 blocks from my house, and my son had to stand on the corner by that school to take a bus where he would take to Canal Street, where he would eventually take another city bus to get all the way uptown to go to Lusher High School, when all I ever wanted was the choice to send my child to a school in the neighborhood. But many community steering committees, our voices were dismissed as money was squandered by the Recovery School District in a farce of community engagement. There's been a lot of talk about the data, whether it worked or not. You know, I personally don't believe that the data tells the whole story. We have to look at how this is working in the reforms in the lives of people. You know, the idea was that parent choice was going to drive schools to improve. I don't think that the data can say that parent choice drove schools to improve, because parents don't have real choice. There's this idea that some people get the data and some people don't get the data. It just casts real doubt on what are the real numbers coming out of New Orleans. Who are the children who are not counted? I definitely know of some special needs kids who simply stopped going to school. So if Doug is looking at the whole system and these kids are not there anymore, then if those were low-performing students, then they're not counted in the data. We do know that a recent report said that there are 26,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 24 in New Orleans who are not in school and who are not working. Are these some of the students who were in these high schools that were just closed and maybe some of them didn't make it into another school? We don't know. It would be good to know. We don't know how many of these kids didn't get into the high school they wanted to and dropped out in 8th grade. We don't know this information, and we really need to know this information. When we think about parental involvement, we think about parents being at the school and volunteering in the class, being on the PTA, PTO. But when you're in a city that has recreated, actually exceeded its post-Katrina poverty rate, that's going to be real difficult to do when your child is no longer in the school and it's in your neighborhood. So while this idea of choice sounds good, especially to middle-class parents who may have a car and they can just drive over to their child's school to be involved, it makes it very difficult for parents who don't have that kind of resource, or grandparents or great-grandparents who may be dependent on being able to just walk down the street or around the corner to the school to be really involved. And I don't think people think about how what kind of burden has been put on parents who are forced to send their kids to schools outside of their neighborhoods. There are some parents who want the choice of a neighborhood school for their own reasons, some of them economic, and maybe they don't want to have to get on a bus to go to the school every time the school calls them because their child doesn't have on the right color belt or the right color undershirt, or because their child is being disruptive. I just got a call from a parent last week. The child at 4:25 in the evening, come pick him up. He can't ride the bus. This is a special needs child. How could this parent, if she didn't have a car, how could she go pick her child up at 4:25 in the evening? And that was not the first time that has happened. This happens over and over again with many of our parents. While the school may provide yellow bus transportation, they're not providing transportation for parents to come to the school to volunteer or to deal with discipline problems. That doesn't happen. And even our selective admissions charter schools, Lusher in particular, Lusher Charter School, which is where my son attended. Tracy mentioned earlier about the lawsuit. When I came back from Katrina, I said, okay, where's the bus? And the CEO says, well, we're a charter school now. We don't provide transportation. And thanks to Tracy, we were able to file a lawsuit, and that was settled. But actually, every child from an Orleans Parish charter school was entitled to bus transportation, but that was not made known to them. And then when Lusher's charter was renewed, they were required to provide transportation, but they chose to use city buses. Well, we'll give you a bus token. Now, what parent's going to put their 5-year-old on a city bus to go across town to go to school? So that locks those parents out of those high-performing schools. That's problematic. And so, let's see, we just have to think about what are some of the factors that don't show up. If this is really working in people's lives, would there have been this special education lawsuit? We also have a Title VI Office for Civil Rights complaint because as schools have been closed in New Orleans, a lot of the parents weren't even told about some of the higher performing schools. We went to several of these schools that were about to be closed in 2014, and we asked, how do parents know how to apply to another school? And we were told, well, we give them the one app. Well, some of those parents were given the one app after the deadline for the highest performing schools. So that's not giving people equal access and equitable access to the highest performing schools whose deadlines had already passed. In 6 years, in New Orleans, 27 schools have been closed, displacing 5,000 children. Of those schools, 7 of them were charter schools, which displaced 1,751 children. How do you just accept that type of instability in children's lives and call it a reform? That's not what we needed post-Katrina. I know I needed stability. I needed normalcy. I needed what was familiar to me, and we didn't give that to the families as they try to rebuild their lives. Our parents had to navigate a whole new system. And so, you know, if there is any real increase in test scores, and I really doubt that there's a real benefit to our community, even based on Doug's data, I doubt it. But if there is, what has the cost of that been? When you look at the high unemployment rate of African-American males in our city, the increased poverty rates, when we know we shut down 4 housing projects and many of the people who came back can't even get back into those schools. We have recreated poverty in post-Katrina New Orleans with young people not being able to find jobs or have dropped out of school or not enrolled in college. We've caused a lot of problems. So where do we go from here? We can have a system of neighborhood schools and a robust system of schools of choice. We can do that if that is what the reformers want to make happen. But I believe that there's just a totally different agenda to privatize public education, even at the expense of what is in the best interest of children. Parents must demand more of their charter schools so that the accountability is to parents and not some ever-changing system of metrics that penalizes schools and teachers and whole communities if students don't meet a certain test score. Parents need to hold these schools accountable to them. There is a need for a truly independent review of the data submitted by schools to the Department of Education. Dr. Barbara Ferguson spoke earlier a little bit about the exit codes. Well, a few years ago, the Department of Education did an audit of the exit codes in Recovery School District, and they found that of the schools they audited, 100% of the exit codes were wrong. So somebody needs to be looking at this data that's coming from these schools to make sure, first of all, it's accurate. And I do believe that the Louisiana legislature needs to beef up the auditing of the Louisiana Department of Education itself. You can't have a Department of Education that is so invested in privatizing public education, but also being charged with monitoring whether or not these school systems are working. There seems to be a big conflict of interest, and I think that there's lax oversight and monitoring, and because the legislature created Act 35, which took over the schools in New Orleans, the legislature created the charter schools law. The legislature has a responsibility to create the kind of oversight and monitoring system to keep everybody honest, because I personally don't believe that what's going on in New Orleans is honest reform. And when I look at the crime rates in my city and the people's fear about crime, and I see young people still hanging out on the streets, and I see that there's 26,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not in school, I have to question whether or not the reforms of the last 10 years have been the kinds of reforms we need to help move the children for whom the prior system did not serve. The new system isn't serving that same group of children, and so we're not moving forward the way we need to move forward as a city that got to rebuild after a major disaster.
Certainly want to thank the panelists.